I'm Allison Terratio, and I'm the field organizer with Planned Parenthood South Atlantic here in Columbia, South Carolina. I'm here this evening to talk about ageism and adultism with E.K. Hoffman. And because we're talking about age and ageism and adultism, I'll share my age, which is 42, going on 43 this year. So first we'll talk about ageism, which is kind of the umbrella term for both of these concepts. And ageism really is any prejudice or discrimination on the grounds of a person's age, whether that be an older person or a younger person. It really shows up in attitudes held by people of all ages, including the words and actions of people in the same age group. So, for instance, people who are in college might make certain assumptions about other college-age people and make statements or have attitudes toward their peers that are discriminatory or harmful. Similarly, older people may have the same kinds of attitudes towards people in their age group, or middle-aged people may have those attitudes as well. Some examples of commonly used ageist language and attitudes are, we'll start with the older folks and kind of work our way down. But one of the ways that this shows up in attitudes toward the elderly is that they are infantilized. And so we see these in comments like, oh, isn't she so precious or cute, or isn't he adorable, which really just minimizes the person's lived experience. This person has led a successful enough life to get to this point, and really reduces their agency and puts the person making the statement in a position of kind of artificial power or superiority. Kind of working our way down, we may make assumptions about a person's age and their ability to interact with technology. So this may show up in very young people when we look at young people, toddlers, and we make assumptions about their ability to interact with a phone or a tablet or something. And then similarly, we assume that older folks may not be able to pick up on technology. And this is particularly harmful as people are in middle age and older and they're still in the workforce. But people make assumptions that they're not going to be able to interact with the tools and technologies that we use in the work environment. We make assumptions sometimes about what someone should have, so what someone should physically have acquired. Let's say someone's of a certain age, we think they should have a house and 2 cars and a dog and a cat and whatever the number of children it is, and that may not be true. Or we may make assumptions about a very young parent, about what their circumstances are. So those are kinds of assumptions that people make about someone's role in life. And then another assumption that gets made is what someone should have achieved at a certain point in their life. So looking at someone in a work environment, whether that person is the boss, so that you look at the older person and assume a certain thing about where they are, or if you look at a younger person and make an assumption that they would not be in charge, right? And those roles could be very much inverted. Assumptions can be made about roles a person fills in their family or society, and this can be related to a person's dependence or independence. So a person might be still living at home with their parents when they're a little older, or someone might be living on their own when they're quite young, and those things can be true and very normal. And when we make assumptions about these ages and roles and stations in life, it can really minimize our capacity to interact with people where they are. We might also make assumptions about what a person's interests are, what kind of music they might like, what their passions might be, and certainly we might make assumptions about their sexuality, whether they are sexually active or not. Some assumptions can be made often about well, this person is older, so they don't enjoy being intimate anymore, and that is certainly not the case for many, many people. Um, all of these assumptions intersect along the lines of class and race and gender and sexuality and ability. And so we are, we do ourselves a real favor when we start to back up and get to know people first, rather than make assumptions about their age.
Thank you for that, Allison. I really appreciate your insight on that. So, my name is EK Hoffman. I use they, them, or Z here pronouns. Currently, I serve as the outreach point person for the Columbia chapter of Southerners on New Ground, and my age is 25. So we have ageism on one hand, right? Like we are talking about what prejudice and discrimination looks like solely on the basis of age. So a subcategory of ageism that we see is adultism. Adultism is the systematic discrimination and mistreatment of youth simply for being young. So adultism is driven by attitudes, behaviors that are based on the assumption that adults are inherently better than young people, and that therefore entitles them to act upon young people without their consent. Some examples you might see of adultist language that you'll want to avoid are phrases like older and wiser that assume that people's wisdom and insight is solely based on the length of their lived experiences rather than the content of those experiences. Phrases like childish or immature that are using being a child as an insult. Phrases like children should be seen and not heard are also harmful adultist language. And then you might see language like respect your elders, they know better, which is not to say that one shouldn't respect their elders, but to recognize that the only reason that we respect someone is not going to be solely on the basis of age. And in the same way that we should respect youth just as much. There's also language that we see as saying that something is that a youth is too old to do something or a youth is too young to do something, as some of those flags that you'll see for adultist language. So a lot of this language connects to these adultist assumptions. So some adultist assumptions that are harmful include that being young is an insult, that being an adult is a compliment, that one can be too old or too young, or that identities are stages. This particularly applies to LGBTQ youth who are frequently told that their identity is just a stage. And this is under the assumption that a youth can't possibly self-identify to a level that they would fully understand themselves. And that is incredibly adultist on its own. So something is adultist if it undermines the self-confidence of a young person, if it creates or reinforces a sense of worthlessness, if it makes a young person feel like they can't be taken seriously, or that their opinions or their insight aren't valid. Something's also adultist if it disenfranchises youth in any way, if it disenfranchises their agency or their ability to consent. And something is adultist as well if it praises youth for conforming to adult standards of respectability. So oftentimes this goes along with that assumption that we see that being an adult is a compliment, and that we are praising youth for conforming to what adulthood looks like in our heads and what is socially constructed to be what adulthood looks like. So what do, right? Like we talk about ageism and how it's harmful. We talk about adultism and how it's harmful. So how do we share power to create these ageist and adultist free spaces? How do we share power in having intergenerational dialogue? So something that we need to do is that we make equal introductions. We make sure that both adults and youth are able to make introductions and share what they feel comfortable sharing, and making sure that that's equal. Secondly, we want to be able to form equitable working agreements that either party can revisit or make changes to. We might call this housekeeping. It's coming back to that working agreement and making sure that it's something that both parties agree to. Using a collaborative curriculum in educational spaces is going to give space for youth agency in how they learn and how they choose those topics that they want to learn. And then thanking youth and adults, especially those who are marginalized, especially if we're talking about the elderly, in that we're thanking folks for their time and for their contributions and making sure that we're not only expecting one side of those to thank for their time and that we're not valuing someone's time more than others. And we want to give youth, especially the opportunity to share skills because youth skills are frequently undervalued. And so making sure that the sharing of those skills and the opportunities to share those skills are equal and that folks are compensated for their time in that way. And then lastly, I would say what's very critical to combating both ageism and adultism is giving opportunity for peer empowerment. Having the peer-to-peer interactions is going to be something that allows people to find community with folks of their own age, as well as to, share those skills that we talked about, to have those valuable interactions, rather than viewing, someone who, for example, for youth, rather than seeing the adult as being the only valuable voice in the room, making sure that youth have that opportunity for peer-to-peer interaction. So I wanna thank y'all for your time. I want to thank Allison for her time, and I hope that we together we can share power, because power isn't pie. It's not a zero-sum game.
I totally agree. And thank you for sharing your time and power with me.